share on my screen. Oh, here we go.
Yeah.
Is that Todd Motto?
Is that Ken Wheeler?
It certainly is.
Sounds very American, mate.
Yeah, it's like a name that comes on the mail and a credit card.
I think we need to get you speaking in an English accent for this hangout.
Is that right?
Is that right, mate?
Yeah. A proper React course. Some beans and toast.
Beans and toast. Cup of tea.
A cuppa. So you want to throw down on some React, homeboy?
Yeah, let's throw down some React.
Let's do it. So I have a JS fiddle here, right? Can I post into the chat on here that the folks at home?
Post it into the Google Plus that we've the channel that we set up.
Is that right?
I don't know if anyone can access that.
It says group chat.
Maybe.
Perhaps.
We'll see.
Yeah, we'll certainly
post it into the. I think.
Put it in the Twitterverse.
Yeah, I've put it on the Google Plus Hangouts on Air page thing. So yeah, anybody who's watching who wants to go to the JS Fiddle, it's in there.
All righty. Cool. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen, and we'll get started on some of these basics.
Share your wisdom, man.
Here it comes.
Tractor beam. Suck us in.
Whoa, hey-o. There we go. All right. So this is the base JS fiddle that I'll be using, and this is probably the littlest amount of code you could probably use here. I mean, you could probably use smaller, but we just put an element directly in here. But this is like the smallest amount of React you can really work with, right? So you have React DOM, and that's the React utility that you use to render to an element on the page. So you'd have something like this up here, like div ID equals container. You would say document get element by ID container here, and then pass in the element that you'd like to render. Can you see my selection that I'm doing here?
Yeah, I can see it. One thing I was going to say is if you could command plus, just so when it's played back, it looks a lot bigger on the fiddle. Yeah, perfect.
Does this get pulled back at all? Not that we necessarily even need it. Nicely. Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, so render takes two arguments. The first being the element you'd like to render. The second being the DOM element that you'd like to render it to. What you're seeing up here is this is new in React 14, and this is a functional, a pure function component, right? So you don't need to create a class or anything like that. You can create a pure function here using an arrow function. You don't really need props in this instance because we're not using props. Well, yeah, I guess no, yeah, you don't need props. And you strictly just return div. If you don't have any internal component logic, this is a great way to go about it. If you just have little partials that you're going to use as templates, this is a phenomenal way to do that. But let's take a look at what usually you're going to be writing. So if you're familiar with ES6 classes, you're going to go ahead and say class app extends react.component. That's required. The only other required thing here would be a render function. And in here, I can really just do what we did before, except instead of hey, I'll say hey. All right. And then it'll essentially do the same thing as before, just with a little bit more syntax around it, right? So I guess let's talk about props first. So when you're creating a React component, right, you have three things. You have props, state, context, right? So props are the external API of a component, right? So if you're looking at these like they're HTML elements, a prop is essentially an attribute. So here I could, on the top level element, say, name equals Todd. And then in here, I can write this.props.name. And it's going to grab it off of there and stick it in here. An interesting point that I'd like to make as an aside is that anytime you have these brackets inside of JSX, that you're gonna go back into JavaScript land and you're out of JSX land. So if you wanted to do like a map or something like that, or any sort of thing, you would do it inside of here. This is where you can use for templating, etc. So you can validate your prop type. So I could say here and say name is going to be React prop types string. Everything will work out. It'll never fatal error on a prop type. If I pop open the console here, oh my goodness, none of that is none of that's our business. If I were to come here and change this to number, we're going to get a warning here surfaced as an error: invalid prop name of type string supplied to app expected number. So you can do this for a bunch of different types. You have function, object, array, number, string. You could use enums with one of. You could do shape to define an object shape. But this is not only does it give you runtime warnings in non-production mode to let you know if you're using it right, but a lot of the time when you look at a React component, you can have a look at their prop types and see how you're supposed to use it.
It's like self-documenting, isn't it?
Yeah, so you can think of props essentially as the component API. And it's always going to come down externally. So, you never mutate props. So we're looking here, name Todd comes in. Yeah, that's an external thing that we're then going to use in here, right? So let's back out of here and back out of here. And let's create a component that renders into app. So we could say, class my component extends react.component. Right. And just for now, I'll return, my component here. And in here, I'll just keep it in there. So this is how you can compose your components, right? I can create a component here, and then inside of the app component, just return that as your child. Let's talk about some children in a React sense.
One question I did have before you jump forward.
Shoot.
On the component that I put together yesterday and today, it uses react.createClass, and obviously in ES6 you're doing class, whatever the class name is for the component, extends react.component. So what are it's probably jumping a little bit ahead, but for anyone who sort of watches this back or is watching, what's the difference between the extending the react.component and creating create class with React?
So at the end of the day, you're essentially getting the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's pretty significant differences, and I'll hop up here real quick to illustrate that. All right. So if I were to say, const app equals React create class, or even var if we're using create class, but whatever. And yes, you can return null, but
mm-hmm.
If we're going to use React create class here, this is going to return an object or function, and you could use a thing called mixins, and mixins are a way of mixing in different classes together. You could do that with extends inheritance, but we don't really do mixins anymore. We do higher order components, right? Mm-hmm. So in create class, you might have mixins available, whereas in ES6 classes, you could do a higher order component via like a decorator or a wrapper, right? So you could say, function wrapper component,
mm-hmm.
return, class wrap component extends that component render return, something like that. Where inside here you might so mixins are typically to add shared behavior between components, whereas if you use a wrapper, you're gonna wrap your component with a component that is gonna essentially do what you would do with the mixins, and then pass the results down onto the component as props. So that's one of those differences. Let's take a look here at them side by side, so I could show some more. Right, render.
Thought you were typing reindeer.
Right, Redner. I can't type today. Yeah. So looking at these two, you see obvious syntactic differences. Obviously, mixins aren't there, but in create class land, you might do something like get initial state, right? And then here you could return like count 1 or something like that, and that's how you're going to set your initial state. In ES6 class component land, that get initial state doesn't exist. So what you would necessarily do is you create a constructor, which is going to take the argument of props, right? And then you have to call super props, right? Because it's extending React component, so you need to call your super class.
Yep.
Then you would say this dot state is equal to count 1. So setting your initial state is significantly different between the two, right? Those are, the only other difference would be here. If I were to put in like a link or something like that in regular create class land, and then I were to say like OnClick is equal to this handle click, I could just oh, by the way, this is object syntax, so you're going to do commas in create class, but you're not going to in ES6 classes. Sure. Here, I could say handle click, right? Do whatever. Particularly say, console.log this, right? And this will reference your class here. Whereas down in ES6 class land, if I were to do the same, if I were to say, a OnClick this dot handle click, this is not going to preserve your context. So you're going to do one of two things. You can either do it in place here like this, right? So you can bind the context to the method right when it's being specified. Yep. Or if you'd like to do it globally, you come over here and say this dot handle click is equal to this dot handle click. I'll bind this. So that you bind the context and the constructor to the instance that was just created.
Sure.
So that's like the main differences, so to say.
And do you prefer the extending the React component rather than using create class? And
very much so. It's pretty much classes moving forward as far as I'm concerned. Mixins are considered an anti-pattern. So we're doing it pretty ES6 classy, at least all day at my full time and all of the work that I write. Unless I'm not in a environment where I can do Babel, which is rare. So let's hop back here real quick, and so we have our one component here that's returning an H1, and we have our app here. Let's I want to say let's mess around with children, but that sounds so wrong. But yeah, let's mess with this dot props dot children. So in here you can specify child nodes, right? So I could say put two paragraph tags here. Say hey everybody, right? And then if you want to render just like a wrapper around those, now what I can do is I can come here, I can put an H1. Well, that's not terribly semantic. I can say div, right, div. And then you can say this dot props dot children. And what that's going to do is it's going to kick out these two inside of a div. Right? So anything that's in children is going to pop out here. You can also do something like, hey everybody, just a text node, right?
Yep.
and then it'll just come out and it's not going to be wrapped in anything but a div, right? So you could just render children out just like that, right? Another thing that you can do that I don't know if everybody knows is you can use functional children. So I could put in my JavaScript evaluation brackets here. I could even put an argument there. So I could say like name, right? So do you see what I'm doing here? I create my my initial JavaScript templating brackets here, and then I have an arrow function with an argument of name.
Yeah.
And then I'm returning h1 name of name. So here you can actually call children as a function with a name. You're good to go.
Does that have many use cases, or is that just a thing?
Yeah, yeah. Believe it or not, if you want to do dynamic templating, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anytime you want to pass data from the inside of this component to whatever its children are, you see it with React Motion. You see it with a lot of animation libraries because they're doing a lot of calculation in here and then passing it to the child. So I could come here and I could say like, styles, right? So the styles are going to get tweened. And then I could come here and say, h1 style like this, and then say like, left is styles.left, and it'll continuously re-render this as it changes in here, so that you have this template and you can use that to do animation. So that's a place that you might see that. Further, right? I'll show you some. You don't always have to just spit the children on out there. You can mutate and iterate over them. So I could come here and say this props.children.map, bust out a nice little arrow function here. On map, you're going to have child index, children if you even want to. Wow, nice line wrap, Fiddle. And then I could wrap these. So these are paragraph tags. I could wrap them in LIs or something like that. So I could change this to UL ulive. So much fun.
Yeah, and are the P tags persisted through, or are they replaced?
No, they're persisted through. So we're putting a P tag right here.
Okay. Oh yeah, because it's just Sorry.
Yeah. If you'd like to be truly gangster, right? If you want to take the hey and the Todd right out of here, right? That's very simple to do. You could just say child.props.children.
Yeah, and that would give you the text node inside the node.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but there's significantly less margin there. So now you just have these text nodes right here. Whereas if you pull that back, whoa. Chill, bro. .jpg. Yeah, now you have LIs with the P's inside, right?
Yep.
So you can do a lot of mutation there, which is pretty fun. So Todd, you want to build some tabs?
I've already done that. Yeah, go on then. Let's show your tabs, I guess, and then you can make mine look terrible.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to leverage some of this stuff to decrease the surface of the API, right? So that we can make it as small as possible. My personal theory is that I like as little tags as possible. So a lot of the times you'll see separate tags for every separate little piece of something, but a lot of the times there's a more terse way to do that, right? So we could do something like this. Right, and I'd also like to touch on state while we're doing this. Right, so this would be a good way to understand how state works. Right? So we're going to say tabs here, and then we could say something like div, right, div. Wow. So much fun. I should probably just hit enter, right? This is crazy talk. What am I thinking? So we can do this, and let's create 3 tabs just for funsies. Tab content 2, 1, 2, 3. All right. Let's do tab titles as props. All right. All right. All right. So doing it like this, what I want to do is I want to create a tabs component here where you don't have to have separate components for the children, right? You can just show these characters right here. So let's do that. So I could say class tabs extends react.component, right? Ayo. Right. We're going to need a render method. We're going to have a return. Right. So yeah, let's say class name just for funsies. Let's say, you know, tab wrapper. All right. And then let's create a UL. Right. And then let's say this dot props dot children dot map. All right. Child index. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to render the tabs themselves, like the top title tabs.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to go ULLI on that. You know, we have our children. All right. So I'm going to iterate over these children. I'm going to sneeze. I'm sorry. Woo! Man. Oh,
You break the internet.
Oh man, I've been infected with the React flu. So we're going to iterate over these children. We have child and index here, and you know, your familiar arrow function syntax. Right? And then I'm going to return li, right? And then, you know, just to get this going, let's just say child.props.title, right? So we're going to take the title right off of that div. Remember, that div is not a div. It's not a div. It looks like a div, might act like a div, but it's not. It's a react.dom.div, right? So when you see that, that's you know, it's not a real div. It has all the properties that, you know, you might come to expect from any other React element. So you can put props on them and you can snag them off. Yeah, it's all a virtual DOM. It's all object representations of what is going to be rendered. So
yeah, that's one of the things I actually really liked about the React.dom stuff, is because when you create like a tab set in Angular, for example, or any other library that uses framework rather, that uses like raw HTML, is that if you want to create a property called title, like we had a tab component which was a huge container, and you create a title, which then means when you hover over anywhere in the box, you got the title, which is actually an HTML attribute. So you get that little hover box with whatever you've created the title as. So the fact that you can call it title, I know it's just a name, and it doesn't actually create the physical DOM. It just uses it as like passes it through to whatever you want to do, children props.
That's right. Oh, by the way, just to touch on some, because I know I wanted to talk about some gotchas here in JSX. There are some props that don't directly translate. Class, right, is a reserved word, right? So you actually need to write class name. So people might try to write some React components and just throw class on like they've been doing in HTML. And they're like, why isn't the class showing up? Why isn't the class? It's because class name. Hilariously, you also can't use for on labels, right? Okay. So if I create a label, right, and we're gonna do like a for, and we're gonna go by like the name of an input or something like that, it's actually like HTML for or something like that. I think you need to use that because for is a reserved word in JavaScript, and this gets pulled out. Similarly, if you're doing CSS and JavaScript, right? If you're going to say like, float none or float right or something like that, you actually also need to wrap float, right? Because float is a decimal. It's a reserved word. So yeah, there's a couple gotchas where, you'd be like, what's going on? And you're like, oh. But most of the time you just wrap it into string or use something with class name or HTML4 and you're good to go. So here we are. Go ahead.
Doesn't JSX actually print that out on the console that you? Because I know I did it earlier and it said, "Do you mean class name?" And that was just from the fact of me writing class all the time. Does it do it with the other words like for? Will it tell you to use it?
I believe so, and that's like one of my favorite parts of React is that it really yells at you meaningfully. It's got some of the best error messaging. It's like, hey, I kind of know where you're going with this, but you're gonna want to do it this way. I'm like, wow, thanks, React. So it's like super helpful in that way. All right. So have you seen anything around CSS and JavaScript, like inline styles? Yeah.
Yeah. I know you mentioned it the other day about getting rid of style sheets and rendering directly to DOM elements.
Yeah. So these don't look a whole lot like tabs right now. So maybe we should do that. And I really don't feel like writing CSS, so let's do it in JavaScript CSS. All right. So I can say const styles, right? And then I can say UL, right? That goes on the UL, right? Not the LI? Or am I losing it?
Magic.
LI, isn't it?
Oh, you can do it on the UL or the LI. I normally do it on the UL.
Ah, there we go. Took it off. That's great. Yeah, so we could say UL here, right? Let's say like what? Adding 5. These rascals, let's say, float left. Oh boy, having way too much fun. Go padding 10, all right. And then say background.
What if you wanted to do? Can you just do if you wanted 10? Does that default as 10 pixels? Does it? If you want,
That's right. If you wanted to use an alternate, thing of measurement, I could say like 0. Oop.
Oh yeah.
Wow, that was an awesome M guess. All right, and then let's see. There you have it. You could even margin 5 these to space them out a bit. Right, and that's what these inline. So really, what you're doing here is you're saying li style, and then just putting it right on there. Right, you're spreading this object full of styles right onto the element. All right. So I could even go so far as like not even create the anchor. Right, I could come here and say cursor pointer. And you could click these. Normally, I would use a library called Radium to do the hovers. Have you heard of Radium?
Nope, haven't now.
Well, yeah, we built it over at Formidable Labs. It's pretty lovely. Been having a ton of work done on it by Ian Obermiller lately, doing some really, really wild things. But it's pretty much like the gold standard for doing inline styles in React. It takes care of a lot of different things. Like right now, I have to set up hovers, but you would be able to say, like for this li here, I would be able to come here and write like hover, and then pass in like background green or something, and that'll just work. They hook all that up so that you can add these pseudo states. So that's pretty lovely. But I mean, we could do that right here. So, you know, we probably want to make these tabs clickable and have them active, right? So
Yeah.
here we're gonna create a state. So we want to keep track of which tab is active, right? So state is a great candidate for that. State is not component API. It's any kind of state that a component needs to have. If you think about things, anything that you would add a class to with jQuery is normally the sort of thing that you would do with state. You know, so if you have like a navigation drop down, that's state. If you have like a custom radio button, that's state. You know, on and off. That's what you could do some really crazy things with state. But for these purposes right here, you know, let's bust out a constructor. You know, and these guys right here, the ES6 classes, they're done in the constructor. I call my super call. Or it's going to yell at me. I can say this dot state equals selected 0, right? And let's add a selected style just for fun, right? So I could say li, and I could say active li, right? So active li background 888. Fair enough.
Is that an active state or is that a active class name?
So this is an active class name. So what I'm going to do right now is when one of these is active, I'm going to extend this with this. Right? So this would be the same thing as like if you had a hover selector that just did this, right? But only during hover it's gonna do a cascade overwrite of this. Right? So I could do something here where in my map here where I have style. Right? So let's bump this down to the next line here. And I can say style is equal to object.assign. I sure hope this works in here.
Good thing.
Right, and then I'm going to assign to an empty object, right? So I'm not going to mutate either of those, just kind of just cram them into another one. And then, so I have my original styles.li, and I can say this dot state dot selected is equal to index, right? The index of our loop, right? And then throw a ternary there and say styles.active li or an empty object, right? Heyo. So I'm merging the result of this into the baseline styles. I'm saying if it is the selected index, merge this, otherwise just merge the empty object into this. Right? And this should be interactive, so now we're going to have to add an onClick. Right? Events in React are like events in 1994, where you're just going to write onClick, OnSubmit, on whatever. And I could say this dot set. I'm just going to move this over because this line wrapping is killing me inside. Okay, that's fine. That's great. A bit more readable. So I can say set selected, right? Again, we're using ES6 classes, so let's bind it, right? So come back up here. I'm going to write set selected, right? But how are we going to know which one, right? So using bind, not only can we bind the context, but I can bind the index, right? So I could keep I here and say this dot set state, right? Selected I, right? So much fun. So break. Do you have any questions about what I've just done?
No, one thing I was going to say, because I've built a similar component, was the event object. I think in some libraries or frameworks, it actually gives you the event first, doesn't it? So when you have an OnClick event, it will give you the event and then the value or something like that. Whereas React does it the other way around. It puts the event at the end.
Yeah. So you could also use window.event. I could come here and say console.log window.event. Or you could just have event there, right? Oh, Christ almighty.
Yeah, because you can pass in event as the second argument for select, and it just gives it to you.
Whoop. Yeah. So you have window.event right there.
Yeah.
And you could just hit it right there if you want to. Do you understand how SetState works?
It's like a update the internal component, I guess. It's
so it's like a setter, right? So you're coming from Angular, right? Where I would be able to say this dot state dot selected equals I, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's gonna watch this, right? So on the next run of the digest loop, it would pick up that this has changed based upon a diff, and then that would force the render, right?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no digest loop in React, so you have to use an explicit setter here. I need to say this, the set state, right? Selected I, and when you call set state, that's going to tell the component, right? If things are different, as they are, re-render it with the new conditions here based upon that state, right? So that's why it's important to call set state, because it will update your component.
Yeah.
If you want to store something that you don't want to have the component update based upon the changing of it, right? Any mutatable value or anything like that, you could do two different things, right? So if I have if I want to do like a timeout or something, I could say like this dot timeout equals set timeout, right? And then you could attach it right to the instance, so that then later you could say cancel timeout this dot timeout. Some people are fundamentally opposed to storing things on the component instance, so they'll use module closures, right? So if we were writing this in a regular application setup, you're going to be using ES6 modules, like import from.
Yeah.
So you could use the closure of that module to say like, let timeout, and then in here say timeout equals that sort of thing.
Yeah, and just access it inside the other methods. Yeah.
Yeah, but generally speaking, any value that should cause this to re-render, you're going to want to go ahead and put in state and use set state to do that. All right, so we've made it this far where we're rendering out our UL here, right? And then we might want to say like our tab body, for example. So I could say div style equals styles dot body, and so we want to we want to show the selected one. So here I can just say this props dot children and this dot state dot selected, right? When you have more, if we're just have one tab here, it's going to return it instead of the array. So realistically, you probably would do you're not really going to have tabs if you don't have more than one element, but for safety's sake, you probably check. I'm not going to do that right now. It's not going to come back as a single index array if you only have one thing in here.
Yeah, I looked at that earlier, and if the this.props.children wasn't an array, then just assign this.props into an empty array, and then stuff like map would then obviously work when you're creating the menu.
But for all these rascals here, you're gonna you could actually React has a to array for the children too. So there's React child utilities. You could do something. You say like React.children to array this props children. If you only want there to be one, and you only want to make sure that you get one back whenever, you could say only, right? And that'll make sure that it'll actually validate with a warning that you're only returning one. There's some pretty cool stuff there. So this will have this state.selected right here. Styles.body is undefined at the moment, so that's no fun, right? But I could come here and say.
It's all those floats you've been playing with, mate.
That's right, having way too much fun here. I can say with 100% for percentages. You're gonna have to use a string. I can say background. CCC for fun. It probably already is like CCC.
It looks quite.
Whoa. Forget floats, bro.
Inline block it.
Yeah.
It's the 21st century way.
Wow, having so much fun. Kill these margins, right? Take the padding off of the UL. Oh my goodness, good gracious. Wow, there we have some tabs. What are your thoughts on this tab method?
It's not quite as good as mine, but
nah, it's close.
Nah, it's pretty
close.
good.
It's close. I mean, we're doing essentially the same exact thing.
Yeah, I like the inline styles approach. I know it's probably considered a horrific practice, but I know you mentioned to me the other day about using inline styles to, I guess, for people watching this back and watching now, like why? Because do you use Formidable? You use inline styles, don't you? We
do. Not exclusively. It's more of like a tool for the job sort of thing. But not only does Formidable, but it's really catching on. A lot of people like inline styles, particularly for the computed part. Right. So if you have styles or you have UI that's going to react to data, doing that with inline styles, it's a lot easier to do than setting up all these CSS classes for it. I would still do structural stuff with regular CSS. That said, if you ever use React Native, it's 100% inline styles. 100% inline style, just like this. In fact, the Radium API and the React Native API are so close to each other that you can write components for both the web and React Native if you're careful, and the style sheet will work the same.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Want to mess around with some forms?
Yeah. Some form stuff will be good.
Yeah, so let's play with some forms here. So I'm gonna back this out.
I was looking at the docs for the form stuff, and I like the way that you kind of set the value, and then like you tell it when to update and stuff. Whereas it's quite interesting thinking coming from an Angular side of how you're doing it in React. So, and obviously we don't have a digest cycle to slow us down. So we've got
no sir, and it'll preserve your cursor index and everything. So your cursor doesn't go crazy on re-render. So I'm just going to wire up a type equals text and a type equals submit here, right? And a form, and I'm going to say OnSubmit equals this handle submit, right? Let's do a little form validation with React, right? So let's say handle submit. Right.
One thing on the naming conventions for callbacks and stuff. When I started playing with React stuff, I actually started writing like Angular directives using sort of React like syntaxy stuff. So instead of doing like, I don't know, my controller dot do foo or whatever, I would actually write like handle click or handle submit or on submit or on click. So I know it's just purely a naming thing, but do you prefer like an on click or a handle click, like for the actual name?
I think that the on syntax is already used for binding the events, right? So that would look a little redundant here. So I usually do like a handle submit or something that form changed or something like that.
Yeah, no, I was reading an article earlier and I stumbled across the guy had used on click and then on this dot on click, so I thought I'd ask you.
Yeah, so oh yeah, sorry, we're gonna have to bind this to it, right? Yeah, so this will fire on submit, right? And let's say we want to validate this is a zip code, right? We're gonna validate this is a zip code. This will be fun. So we have handle submit, right? We're probably gonna want to create like a form validity thing. So let's create a constructor with props. Super duper props, right? And let's just say the valid is equal to false, right? Let's start it off with it being false, right? Form on submit, handle submit by this. All right, so let's just see what we're working with right now. Hey-o. we have an input.
It's beautiful.
Whoa. So the first thing we're probably going to want to do, right?
Prevent default.
Have the e.prevent default so that it's not going to try and make a post to a non-existent target, right? And then why don't we validate this as we type, right? So I don't really want to do anything with their value, but I can say, on change, right, is equal to, validate input. We name it that, right? This validate input. Stop on this. All right. So now we can write a method validate input. All right. I'm gonna have my e here. Ooh. And then I could say let valid equal false, right? I'm gonna go with US zip codes, right? So I'm gonna say if we require at least 5 digits, right? So I'll say if e.target.value.length is less than 4. Wait, is length 0 indexed?
No, don't think so.
Yeah, length less than 5. Valid.
You could do .value.trim just to get rid of white space, but this isn't hardly a production thing, so never mind.
Yeah, this is just conceptual. So I'm going to say if is not a number, e.target.value valid is equal to false, right? This dot set state valid. Right, so right here we can say, we're going to start off with valid equals false. We're going to go with a baseline of validity when we're validating it. If it's not the right length, valid's going to equal false. If it's not a number, a total number, valid equals false, we can set state valid, right? So just for funsies here, I can say right here, say this dot state valid. Where are you? Boolean values, man. Gotta love them. Heyo. Right, so this is just going to continue to be invalid. Let's put in my home zip code here. Whoa! Whoa! There you have it. Right, so there's some baseline form validation here. If we wanted to do something clever with that, right, I could put this down here. Right, style equals, right, and then say outline none so we can see it, and then say border color is equal to this state.valid. So if it's true, we're going to go with whatever the default is. Otherwise, red. All right. So we're working with an invalid form here. Now we're working with a valid form.
Majestic. Majestic.
Majestic indeed. Yeah, and that's kind of like what I was talking about before about state-driven UI.
Yeah.
Right? Where it's like, you can surface in the UI kind of like the condition of your data at any given time, and that's really easy to do with React. You just sit here and make it valid or invalid at any given time. So it's really easy to validate on one input while you're sitting here doing it, right? However, we still have our handle submit here, right? And we're kind of just preventing default, right, which doesn't do a whole lot. So if we were in this handle submit from the form and we wanted to look at the value of this input, right? The way that we would do that is via a concept called refs. So every React component has this.refs on it, right? And the way that you add something to it is by adding a ref prop, So I could add a ref that is like, zip code. And then if we hop up to handle submit, I can actually access that at this. I can access the DOM element at this.refs.zip code.
Mm-hmm.
So I could do something like say, getting a call from Shorty. If this.refs.zip.code.value.trim, I could say alert, please add a value, right?
Mm-hmm.
Else, in fact, right up here, we probably want to say if this.state.valid is not equal to true, right? We can return an alert form invalid. Yeah, well, that's going to be invalid anyway if we're hitting this guy right here. Now, let's just say here, like, good to go, all right? If we load it up by default, it's invalid. You say, please add a value because this.refs.zip code value is null. We haven't added anything, right? Good to go, right? Further, we can come here.
Just one thing actually with the if anybody's watching and going, I couldn't see anything for some reason, when you screen share Hangouts, it doesn't show you alert boxes and stuff. So I imagine that they actually did come up.
Oh, so it doesn't show alerts?
Yeah. I think there's an option you can share your entire screen or share just a portion, and one of them shows you like your mouse and alert boxes. But yeah.
Oh, that's funny. All right, so we covered props, state, and now refs. Do you understand how refs work now? You can just put a ref right here, and then you'll have access to it on this.refs.
Yeah, it's kind of like an object for the component, I guess, that you can look up and then reference. Does it just like bind the DOM node and then to its internal object that you can then look up?
Yeah, it's like so if you call it on a React like class element, right, you're going to get that back. Whereas if you call it on a DOM node, you're going to get the DOM node back, right? Because this is on an input, because it's on like a regular like DOM node input, you're going to get the DOM node. But if I had like like this app component, you're going to get that back with refs if you render this with a ref on it.
Yeah,
but you're not using refs a ton of the time when you're not using a DOM element.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So how about we round this out with some context? Not like this context, but contexts in React, which are kind of a really fun undocumented feature that I like to use. And it's certainly worth explaining, right? So you can pass props down to components, right? But what if you wanted to pass it like 3 levels? Right, so you could pass like props here to app. You can say like, name equals Ken, right? And I'm an app, and then on the form, I could say like name equals Ken, right? Or I would say name equals, this.props.name, right? So you could pass these things all the way down. Don't ever do that. So normally this would be a great place for flux, right? If you wanna get from a parent level node, right, down further to deeper in the tree, like 5 levels down, typically you're going to manage that sort of thing with flux, right? But if it's a sort of thing that's like a constant, right, something that's not going to change with very much frequency, you could do it with a context, right? And I'm going to show you how a context works. So we could say class app extends react.component, and then render return, and let's just create like 3 levels here. All right, so I could say like class container extends react component. H1, this props. Children, maybe not an H1. Let's do div. return. We have our container. And let's make a third one. Yeah. Label. So much fun here. All right, so what I want to do is I want to pass something from app to label. Right? So app renders container, container renders label, label renders an H1, and I want to say this context name, right? Mm-hmm. And let's say we want to pass name in when we render. There's a lot of reasons to do something like this. You know, if you're passing values in from the server side or you're bootstrapping data, you know, if you're passing something down from like a router or something like that, you know, Redux and router both use contexts significantly. So I'm going to show you how this works. So let's say name equals Todd, right? Up in here, I can say app child context types, and these are to map pretty closely to prop types. You're actually going to use prop types. So I can say name React prop types string, and then I can say app get child context, right? Yep. Well, that's actually going to go up here. All right, get child context. All right, return name this.props name. All right. So let's talk about this real quick. All right, I have this.props name coming in down here on my app. It's coming in as Todd as a prop. All right. I want to say this.context name and label. Right. So if I want label to have access to these contexts, I need to say label.context types, right? Name React prop types a string, and these two need to match, right? So this context types needs to match the child context types that you've set here, right? This get child context traverses down the tree and will look for these ones that need context applied to them, and then it'll send it to it, right? This should just work. I sure hope it does, and it definitely did. First try. All right, so let's recap that one more time. I have app renders container renders label renders an H1 with this.context.name. This.context is like this.state and this.props, except it gets passed from way up. Couple notes about context. Don't use it unless you have to use it. And if you have to use it, don't change it.
If you have to use it, use Flux.
Generally speaking, most things that you can do context for, you'll get away with Flux, but or Redux for that matter. But like some things, right, it makes a really easy way to pass things down, right? So if you're using Redux, if you use a connect decorator in order to connect to your component, that's using contexts, because the Redux instance of your store that you pass in by the provider gets passed down via context to these components, right? So it's actually using context in order to say, hey, give me a shortcut. So something like the instance of a Flux store, that's not going to change, right? That gets created one time during the initialization, the initial rendering of your components into the screen, and you know that's not going to mutate, right? So really, it's just an easy way to pass that down to whatever necessarily might want it, right? If you have something that's going to change with any kind of frequency, then you know, it probably shouldn't be context, or you're going to probably have perf problems from that. But this is how you can, you know, there's 3 steps. First step is where you want it. You got to say context types is name and then validate the type. The types have to match. And then where you're passing it from needs to specify the child context types, and then get child context, which is a lot like get initial state or something like that. You're going to return an object with the context values, right? So I could come here, I could change this to Ken. Oh, hey-oh. And then it gets passed down via context. Any questions, fine sir?
Thanks, sir. Did you say that was undocumented, did you?
Now it's lightly documented. It was previously undocumented, but existed.
Okay.
So it's still considered experimental, but it's in use in a lot of production level libraries. It's stable enough for my use. There are some absolute gotchas around context. So if you use anything like React Clone Element or something like that, or if you're like importing something, sometimes you can lose your context, right? And if you're losing your context, typically what you're going to want to do is use a functional child to create a new owner relationship, right? So if at any time context isn't working for you, wrap one of your renders here in a functional child, and generally speaking, that should work out because it'll create a new context.
Okay.
Yeah.
One thing I was going to ask actually, which probably a year ago I did it, but passing a because in Angular we can inherit controllers and behavior and all that kind of thing. In React, you can pass functions down from top level components, can you? Which then can go back up to the parent node or component.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. So if I wanted to show you a quick example of that, right? Let's get rid of this context business.
Because the React implementation, I didn't need to use it with the component I put together yesterday, so I didn't actually need to. But the way that you do it in Angular is require a controller, and then that becomes available in a link function. Whereas I think you just pass it through as a prop type, don't you? And then you can use it.
Yeah. So you can create a prop like this. That's a function, right? So I could say on state changed, right? This dot state change bind this. So here I could say state changed. Let's just set up a state real quick. So I could say
super
duper props. Right. So I can say this to state the name equals Ken, or like I actually do this for a living. Here, this set state, right? I say state change, name, this set state, right? Name equals name, right? So if I wanted inside of the container something to happen and then it passes this back up, right? I can do something like this, where for debugging purposes, let's come here and say, wrap it with a div. Right. Pass this out, come here, say this dot state dot name, right? I screwed something up.
It's probably your trigger happy semicolons.
Yeah, I tell you, label is not defined. Wow, that's awesome. All right, yeah, so container, let's close this out. Come on over here. We're gonna render a div, right? Render div, button type equals button. And then let's say OnClick equals this dot props dot on state changed. Remember how we did that prop before?
And then you can call that as a function, which then would you call it passing back up to the parent node component?
Yep. So this will pass this back up. So I already have on state changed over here bound, right? So I'm saying this dot props dot on state changed null, and I'm binding the argument as Todd. So it's going to change from Ken to Todd, right? Here, right?
Change to better name.
Change to a phenomenal name, right? Yeah, and that's how that's done, right? You can very easily pass data like this up the chain here, so that this has this API to call one of your methods here. Generally speaking, in this scenario, I prefer Flux.
Yeah.
And we'll do another hangout that's like completely around Flux, because that's a little bit of a brain melter. But yeah, this like one level of passing it down is certainly acceptable. Once you start getting into like 2 levels of passing it down, you start thinking like, what the hell am I doing here? You know, this just doesn't feel clean. It doesn't feel good. This is shenanigans, pure shenanigans. All right. So I have to wrap up soon. I hear this baby going nuts, but I want to do one thing before I do. And that is I want to go back over functional, pure function components, right? So let's get rid of this container, and let's get rid of all this stuff, and we're back at just having an app, right? So in this div, I can create with pure functions. I can create a component, and let's call it like best name, right? And then the name is probably going to be Ken, right? So I mean, just for an example's sake, so I could say const best name is equal to props, right? And then we can return each one props.Ken or name. Heyo, right? So I've been showing you a lot of like the internal logic of these components, and normally you want to separate your components into 2 different types, right? You have the ones who handle the business, the ones that get their hands dirty, but other ones don't need to, right? And rather than having like a super fat render method, a lot of the time it's great to take little pieces and make them into these little functional components. I like them in different files, but what are you going to do? And really all it is it's literally just a function that returns, right? I'm saying best name is equal to an anonymous function with an argument of props here, right? So you can feed props. There's no problem with that. And then really I'm just going to return an h1 props.name, and you're good to go. And it doesn't have to be a single liner. I mean, I can come here and return like this, right? Just like that. If you want to, if you want to do a little bit more, get a little more functiony, you can, use brackets, and then you have to, manually return. So if you wanted to do anything with the props or anything like that. But generally speaking, you can do some pretty cool stuff just like this.
So you could use that for more of like a component container. So if you had like a reusable form or something that was just merely like a title change, you wouldn't want to, I guess you could just wrap it in a function component and then pass in a single prop value.
Oh yeah. So I mean, this is a great way to do simple templating. So if you wanted to build like a list, right? I could say something like list, and then you come here and say, right. So list, and then put in some children. All right, let's just say 1. 1, 2, and 3, right? So here, I can come here, right? I'm gonna return UL. I can say props.children map child index return li. Come here. Let's see. Yeah, I could just say yep. So something just like that, where there's not really any state management taking place. You don't really worry about lifecycle hooks or anything like that. It's just more of like a template partial piece, and then that's when you'd use one of these as opposed to the full blown. Did I ever talk to you about component lifecycle methods?
Oh, like component did mount and all that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you have here's to go around that real quick. Thin this out for a second.
Isn't the component will mount and did mount? I think will is before it's created as DOM, is it?
Right. So component will mount is right before it is created. Then component did mount is after it is mounted. You have component will unmount, which is right before it unmounts. You have component will receive props, right? And this has next props, right? So you can come here and you can, it's just the props there, and then you can go and do anything you want. So if you have something that it runs off of props, but it's like computed, you can know when new props come down, so you can recompute that value.
Would that be like for a list, for example, if you passed in an array of props, you could then re-render it with a different list? Is that how that works?
I mean, that'll normally just work, but if you do anything like set state based off of props, you would hook into here to make sure that state got reset when new props came in, right? There's other ones like component did update, right? And that's like every time it does like a re-render. One good one is should component update, right? And this gives you next props and next state. And here you can say that if like the next props and the old props are the same, don't render, which really helps performance. Okay. Other times you have like state and prop sensitive kind of values where it's like unless it's different, you don't want to change anything, that sort of thing. So should component update is a pretty great one. Most of the time you use component did mount and component will unmount. It's for adding like event listeners, that sort of thing. So if I'm going to add an event listener, I would do it in component did mount, and then I'm going to remove that event listener in component will unmount. Right. So these are all really helpful for that sort of thing. Now, and a lot of time you'll do something in component did mount, right? So like I could come here, if I was going to do like a timeout, so I could say, constructor props, right? Super props, super duper props. This state equals color red, right? And then in component did mount, I could do something like say like this timer equals set interval, right? Let's do it like every 500, and then say this set state, and then I could say color is going to be this state color is equal to red, and we're going to make it green. Otherwise, change it back to red. Are you ready? This is going to be the most holiday thing that ever happened in America.
You're making it great again.
Yeah, making America great again. One JavaScript tutorial at a time. Right? And then I can say color equals this state color. Right? So ideally, what I can do here is then be a good component writer and say clear interval this timer. If you want to be a real stickler, right? I could say this timer and clear interval this timer, just for safety's sake. So again, what we're doing is we're going to set state in the constructor. We're going to go to default of red. On component did mount, I'm doing a set interval, right? And it's going to loop, and every 500 milliseconds, I'm going to check if the color is red. If it's red, make it green. If it's not, make it red. So this is a fancy ass blink tag, my man. Happy holidays from Ken and Todd. You know what I mean? But this is a great way of doing that. I mean, this is the idiomatic way of doing kicking off things like that. If you were wondering where you should do that, right? It doesn't really belong in a render method. That's going to get called and called and called and called. Whereas these lifecycle methods are great places to set up and tear down.
Yeah. Perfect.
Cool. So I think I ran through most of this API today. Did you have any questions before we wrap up?
I did have one, but I've forgotten it.
Think hard, man.
Oh man. Oh yeah, that was it. It was on the where you do like curly brace, this dot, props dot, whatever, and then you do map. What would you suggest doing as a anonymous callback function, or doing it, breaking the function out and then passing the function in to map?
You know, if it's an iteration, like a quick iteration, you know, like for rendering a list or something, generally speaking, when using map, I like to use inline anonymous functions. Right? If there was any degree of complexity that would prevent that, I would just do it in a instance method, right? So I would say like, you know, render items like this, and then in here I could say like, you know, let items equal this dot props dot items dot map, you know, and kind of just do it inline in this render items here, and then down in your render you could do something like just like that, and that'll clean up your render, and you can move all that business up there. But I very rarely use a named function for iteration.
Yeah, okay. No, I was just looking at sort of like the best practices rather than writing a ton of shit, basically.
I think it's so new that a lot of that's still in the air, best practice wise. You know, kind of the style that I stay with, you know, is at least adopted internally at Walmart. So we have a lot of devs writing it that way. You know, certain things that we don't do. There's certain React standards that I see out there. Like I see with like a lot of the React repos, they'll name, especially like from Facebook too. Like they'll name the components like uppercase, right? So if you have like a file, right? Like if you have a component and you know it's a component file, right? You'll have like you know, list item .jsx or JS, right? And it's capital case to denote that it's a component. But we don't do that at Formidable or Walmart because there's a lot of problems with case sensitivity on OS X.
Okay.
Right. So we would then say dash case, like list item JS. Right. So I mean, there's not like one given standard there. You know, different folks do it different ways. We certainly do it, you know, different naming wise. You know, some people like doing this timer. Some people don't. You know, a lot of people think that makes the component impure. If you're sitting here and mutating it, there's a strong preference towards immutability in React. I haven't done anything with immutable here, but if you saw before, like when I was merging the colors together, you know, not mutating the existing values. So having a clear idea of how your app works and how it's going to work is definitely rooted in immutability. So that's certainly encouraged. Facebook provides immutability utils. You can use immutable JS. You can use seamless immutable, which I like a lot. But a lot of times the immutable stuff has a lot of overhead. So, you know, it's like they're pretty large libraries. Seamless isn't as bad, but, you know, they're fairly large libraries. So it's like, you know, use immutable data if you need immutable data. Generally speaking, you can kind of just keep it immutable by pattern. But if you want, you know, real immutable data, then
sure.
Yeah, we had like an app where we had like undo and redo, right? So we used immutable to keep like the different states. So we were able to just hop, you know, rewind and fast forward and all that jazz. And it was nice. But yeah, I think that's generally about it. So next time we have to talk about Flux.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether you can do that in a JS fiddle, can you? Or?
Yeah, you certainly can.
Yeah.
Dan Abramoff did a lovely job of it doing that. So I mean, I'll probably do Redux. I think that as a community, it's generally settled on Redux at this point as the gold standard for Flux. So I'll probably do Redux. We'll probably do Redux alone and then implement it, and then we can look at some things like real, you know, right here we're making blinking happy holidays things, but you know, if you want to be productive in React, I mean, I write non-trivial React all the time, so I could show you some really, you know, going out to APIs, getting data back and working with it, you know, the sort of thing that you do at a day job.
Yeah, I think that's the powerful jump, isn't it? When you pick up a new framework, anyone can do a hello world, anyone can do a little bit of input binding and creating a component or whatever. It's the actual tying it into the application ecosystem with like events and like fetching stuff from XHR and doing the whole kind of full application life cycle rather than just a form or something like that. So
that's right. That's right. Yeah. So you got to worry about things like accessibility and analytics and, you know, instrumentation and internationalization, things like that. And you know, I could run through all that, but I think Flux is a nice next step.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, I think yeah, apologies for anyone watching live. We kind of we're going to do this silently because I'm not very good at React yet, and yeah, we just decided to post it online. So thanks for watching. I think there was like 30, 40 something people watching at one point. So yeah, it's really cool.
Thanks everybody for showing up and checking it out. I hope, and please feel free to reach out to the both of us on Twitter if you have any questions about any of this. I'd be happy to answer any that come through.
Yeah, ask you, not me.
Yeah.
Give me 2 months.
It's pretty good now. You're making your own tab components. You got this.
I've got it. I gotta flux it up later as well.
Don't ask him about Flux yet. We're working on that.
What the flux? Sweet.
Awesome.
So yeah, we will put some. Well, yeah, I think it's we've jumped the Christmas gap and now we're going to jump the New Year's gap. So it'll probably be sort of early January. I think we do the next episode, if we want to call it that, next online tutorial. So yeah, if we'll be posting links and stuff out. So if anyone wants to watch, can depart his wisdom.
Be there, be square.
Yeah. Cool.
Later, alligators.
Bye-bye.